Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch, the show that brings you in-depth expert analysis of all the major happenings on the international front. I'm your host, Vikas Swarup. This is our 75th episode, and to mark this special milestone, we will focus on a very special visit, that of the King of Bhutan, His Majesty Jigme Khesar Namgyel Wangchuck, who travelled to India from April 3 to 5 at the invitation of the President of India, Srimati Droupadi Murmu. India and Bhutan share an exemplary bilateral relationship characterized by trust, goodwill and mutual understanding at all levels, strong bonds of friendship and close people-to-people ties. Formal diplomatic relations between India and Bhutan were established in 1968. The basic framework of India-Bhutan relations is the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation signed in 1949 between the two countries, which was renewed in February 2007. The India-Bhutan Agreement on Trade, Commerce and Transit, which was first signed in 1972 and revised most recently for the fifth time in 2016, establishes a free trade regime between the two countries. The agreement also provides for duty-free transit of Bhutanese exports to third countries. India is Bhutan's top trade partner, both as an import source and as an export destination, with total bilateral trade in 2021-22 amounting to $1.4 billion. India is also the leading source of investments in Bhutan, comprising 50% of the country's total FDI. India continues to be the principal development partner of Bhutan, extending economic assistance to Bhutan's socio-economic development since the early 1960s, when Bhutan launched its 5-year plans. India's contribution of Rs 4,500 crores to Bhutan's 12th 5-year plan constitutes 73% of Bhutan's total external grant component and focuses on areas such as agriculture and irrigation development, ICT, health, industrial development, road transport, energy, civil aviation, urban development, human resource development, capacity building, education and culture. Mutually beneficial hydropower cooperation with Bhutan is a key pillar of bilateral economic cooperation. 4 hydroelectric projects totaling 2,136 megawatt are already operational in Bhutan and are supplying electricity to India and generating significant revenue for Bhutan. 2 more large hydroelectric projects are under various stages of implementation. The partnership has now expanded to new areas such as digital domain, space, financial connectivity, startups, and cooperation in the field of STEM education. Bhutan now accepts RuPay cards and became the second country to launch the BHIM app. A joint India-Bhutan satellite was launched into space on November 26 last year by ISRO's Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. 4,000 Bhutanese are studying in undergraduate courses in Indian universities on self-finance basis, and over 950 scholarships are being provided annually by the Government of India for Bhutanese students to study in India in a wide range of disciplines, including medicine and engineering. Buddhism provides a strong cultural connect between India and Bhutan, and a number of Bhutanese pilgrims travel to Buddhist sites in India. To discuss India-Bhutan ties in greater detail and the visit of His Majesty the King of Bhutan, I am privileged to have with me a very special guest. Ambassador Pankaj Saran served as India's envoy to Bangladesh and Russia and as the Deputy National Security Advisor. He oversaw relations with Bhutan as Joint Secretary North. He is presently convener NatStrat, an independent, not-for-profit center for research on strategic and security issues. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Saran.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start with the most basic question. Why is Bhutan important to India, and why is India important to Bhutan?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the show. I think the reason why Bhutan is important to India is that it is nestled in the Himalayas and it is sandwiched between India and what is called the PRC today, but which earlier was Tibet. And that is one very important reason. It's a small, very, very special culture which it has, and the geography dictates a lot of its importance for India. Of course, we have a lot of history because if you look at the history of Bhutan and its unique cultural identity, it is as old as India's. So, of course, we have the Treaty of Sinchula, the Treaty of Punakha, and then, as you mentioned, the Treaty of 1949, which was signed after the British left India. And at that time, India was actually paying monetary compensation to Bhutan as a gesture of goodwill towards Bhutan. So we go back a long, long way. And the reason why Bhutan is so special is because paradoxically, it is that little small piece of territory which escaped the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1950. And therefore, today, Bhutan still regards its northern neighbor as Tibet and not as China. And they are scared of China and they associate themselves more with Tibet. But yet, they have a very distinct cultural identity which is different from Tibetan Buddhism. So they want to promote and they want to preserve Bhutanese Buddhism, and there is a long history about how Buddhism evolved and how the monarchy evolved in Bhutan. So there are many reasons for why Bhutan is important to India. Insofar as why India is important, I think again the answer lies in geography, and I think we've been able to demonstrate to our people and to the rest of the world how a small country and a large country can peacefully coexist on the basis of equality and mutual respect. And I think we provide Bhutan a lot of the opening to the rest of the world. We provide Bhutan with a sense of security against a big, huge northern neighbor. And there are many other reasons why Bhutanese feel an empathy to India. These are some of the reasons.
Now, how do you see the visit of His Majesty? And what were the concrete outcomes of this very important visit?
You know, there is a tradition where the King of Bhutan comes to India periodically. And so I feel and I see this visit as part of that tradition. And that actually, the relationship between the King and our leadership has driven the relationship. So I see the visit in that context. And I think the main outcome of the visit was a reaffirmation of the relationship, of the fundamental consensus in the relationship that India will support Bhutan in its socio-economic transformation, and in return, Bhutan will ensure that we can live in a secure environment within the region. And that, I think, reaffirmation at periodic intervals, and also to review some of the bigger projects, particularly in the hydro and other areas, and just to have an exchange of views. So I think that is the overall kind of context of the visit. But here I must say that when we signed the treaty in 1949, we have to remember that the historical milestone in the relationship was 2007, when that treaty was updated and revised. And in 2007, when the current king's father came to India, he and our leadership agreed to upgrade the treaty in the sense that there was a particular article number 2 which was really most important in the treaty, and that was modified in 2007. We still retain the essence of the article, which is that we will respect each other's national interests, and number 2, neither side will do anything to harm the security and the national interests of the other. So that was actually a high point in the historical evolution, because in 2007, 2 other major events happened when it comes to the monarchy. First is he abdicated power and took Bhutan towards a constitutional democracy. And number 3, that year marked the 100th anniversary of the Wangchuck dynasty. So you had the treaty revised, you had the abdication of the king, and when the current king took over and was sworn in 2008, and the 100th anniversary of the Wangchuck dynasty. So from that period till today, 15 years, I think the relationship between India and the new king, the current king rather, has progressed and has grown stronger and stronger.
Now, Bhutan is unique in terms of using a gross national happiness index to measure its progress. In fact, this concept is also enshrined in its constitution. So how is it different from GDP, and what are its main pillars?
It's again a very typically Bhutanese construct, and I think it is a manifestation of everything about Bhutan. You know, its serenity, its nestling in the Himalayas, its huge forest cover. So I think the main message in devising this index was that we will not measure our success in monetary terms, but we will measure our success in terms of how environment friendly we are, how sustainably our development model is, how are we able to preserve our culture. And we have to remember that it's a very tiny country. I mean, the population is anywhere between 600,000 to 700,000 people. That's it. And they're more or less homogeneous in terms of their Tibetan Buddhism, which they follow. And so these are the things which I think are most important for them, rather than the classical measure of per capita income. And this is their identity which they want to preserve at all cost. And therefore, they are very wary of external influences which might prejudice or poison their own brand of Tibetan of Buddhism.
Now, you mentioned earlier how Bhutan has modernized itself and transformed with the king abdicating power and creating a constitutional monarchy. It was also reported that during this visit, His Majesty briefed Prime Minister Modi on the significant transformation and reform initiatives that Bhutan is currently undertaking. Could you take our viewers through some of these new reforms that are being undertaken?
Yes, I think from 2007-8 onwards, Bhutan has had a cycle of elections. So the first election was actually the most difficult because the people of Bhutan, the citizenry, they were not used to elections. I mean, for them it was the Wangchuck dynasty and the monarchy which was supreme. So over time, in the last 15 years, they've had a series of elections, and every election has thrown up a new prime minister. They have a parliament, a small parliament, and that process of maturity of the democratic process is actually underway. And that leads to its own problems, because when people are not ready for democracy and they still want the king back and they want the monarchy to play a role, but the monarch is saying, no, I do not want to play that role. I want to hand it over to the elected representatives. So I think on the political reform, that is work in progress. On the economic reform, again, it is accompanying the political reform in the sense we are seeing more private Bhutanese actors, businesses, investments, etc. These are mushrooming. So that also requires some adjustment within the country. And number three, I think the younger generation of the Bhutanese are now looking beyond Bhutan, beyond India, to other, faraway lands for education, for upgrading technology skills, and to see how Bhutan can take the next leap forward in terms of its technology and economic development. So I think that whole thing constitutes what would be described as the ongoing transformation. The isolation of Bhutan, which we were kind of somehow used to some extent has reduced quite a lot. I mean, Bhutan had this self-imposed isolation from the rest of the world. It was fairly like a monastic state. But now they're ready to open up, but calibrated. They're not going to rush into opening up, but that is also part of the transformation.
Now, hydropower cooperation has emerged as the cornerstone of our economic partnership. How is it a win-win situation for both countries?
It's actually extremely interesting because it stands in sharp contrast to, for example, with due respect, to the failure in the India-Nepal relationship, where despite Nepal having double or triple the hydro potential, we somehow failed in utilizing that for the benefit of Nepal and India. Whereas in the case of Bhutan, there was a political consensus between the two leaderships that we can actually have a mutually beneficial model where India participates in the construction, both physically as well as financially, and Bhutan benefits from the sale of electricity to India. And I think today it's about 2,000 megawatts. It will probably go up to 3,000-4,000 megawatts. And all the projects, by the way, are run of the river. So they're not storage dams. And so therefore they're ecologically much better than having storage dams, except one which we are talking about, the Sankosh. So I think in overall terms, the hydro cooperation has contributed to the Bhutanese economic development and progress. It has helped India to meet its electricity needs. The electricity is coming from renewable sources, which is climate friendly. And all in all, Bhutan is able to exploit its most important natural resource. So this is, I think, something which, again, it's also a model for the rest of the world, how a big country like India can actually work so successfully with a small country like Bhutan, and how there is such a high degree of mutual trust and confidence in each other.
And we also keep, I think, periodically increasing the power tariff, For instance,
Exactly.
the tariff for Chukha,
Yeah.
the first power plant, was revised during the recent visit. Now, a new dimension is the proposed trilateral hydropower cooperation among Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India. You also served as High Commissioner to Bangladesh. So, how do you see the prospects for sub-regional cooperation in the energy sector?
I think they're very good. I think this is an idea whose time has come, because here you have Bangladesh, which is power deficit. India used to be power deficit. Actually, paradoxically, we are doing very well in the energy sector. But at that time, at one point, we were very short of power. And Bhutan is sitting on what is supposed to be estimated at a capacity of about 30,000 megawatts theoretically. But in terms of techno-economic and feasible power capacity, it's about 22,000 megawatts. So, you have a good supply and demand equation out here. So what we have done in the last few years is we've actually issued guidelines to enable the transmission of surplus power from Bhutan to Bangladesh crossing Indian territory. Now, obviously, because of the bilateral arrangements with Bhutan, the first priority of the power cooperation is between Bhutan and India. But Bangladesh is in separate negotiation with Bhutan to develop power projects in Bhutan for the Bangladeshi market. The Indian role is to allow this transit and to allow the transmission lines over Indian territory, and that is happening. So I think this is an excellent model of cooperation where all three sides stand to benefit.
Now, connectivity was also a very important subject of discussion between His Majesty and Prime Minister Modi. What are the various forms of connectivity that we are exploring with Bhutan? And in this context, how important is the Kokrajhar-Gelefu rail link project?
Well, connectivity, I mean, we have a common border with Bhutan. So the movement of people is visa-free, and it is through land, and this rail link is going to be a new addition. So
it will be the first ever rail link between India and Bhutan.
First ever rail link, because so far it's through road, and it used to be through Phuentsholing and Jaigaon, that was the primary link. On the eastern side of Bhutan, there was not much connectivity. So this is going to add to our traditional connectivity of people, of goods, of everything else. So we are actually extremely well connected, including financially.
Yes, now with RuPay cards being launched in Bhutan,
exactly.
Bhim app.
And national treatment.
Yes.
As per the treaty, we are obliged to give national treatment in terms of employment, in terms of access to judiciary, etc. So, in fact, India and Bhutan actually represent in our region, if you look at it among all the countries, the best form of connectivity that exists between any two countries.
Now, Bhutan shares a 477-kilometer long border with China. And the two countries have a border dispute on which they have held 24 rounds of boundary talks, even though China and Bhutan officially do not have diplomatic relations. Now, we all remember what happened in 2017. A military standoff took place between India and China in the Doklam Plateau, which China claims. Now, during the standoff, Bhutan maintained a firm stance against China, with India providing support to Bhutan. However, there have been recent reports that Bhutan's stand on Doklam has shifted. How accurate are these reports, and should India be concerned?
Well, again, as you said, there's a history, 24 rounds of talks. So, Bhutan is an independent, sovereign country. That was the basic premise of the treaty that was revised in 2007. And so what they do with China is something between Bhutan and China as two independent, sovereign countries, and India respects Bhutan's sovereignty. And they are free, and they have the full right to take whatever decision they want on the border. Insofar as specific areas of the boundary are concerned, such as Doklam or other parts of the Bhutan-China boundary, this is something which, it is incumbent only, it is the responsibility only of Bhutan to talk to China about. The treaty obliges Bhutan, and it recognizes that India has security interests in Bhutan, and Bhutan is obliged legally and in terms of the treaty to ensure that nothing that they do in their territory affects either our security or our national interests. So we have no reason to suspect or to think otherwise that Bhutan will live up to its treaty obligations. And insofar as their exact positions on individual sectors of the boundary, etc., is concerned, I think that is a matter which our experts are involved in. But clearly, there are parts of the boundary which are critical for our security. The Bhutanese know it, and we know it, and I'm sure that our officials are in close touch with each other to make sure that whichever way this negotiation moves, nothing will be done which will have an adverse impact on India. And of course, as you know, it's a truism to say that India reserves the right to take all measures to protect itself in terms of its security and its national interests. Clearly, Bhutan is strategically located. So this is well known. This is no secret to anyone. And I think the beauty of the relationship is that we can talk to each other, we can have frank discussions, but at the same time, we fully respect Bhutan's sovereignty and its right to take independent decisions on how it deals with third countries. But there is a tri-junction. So
Yes.
there, of course, we have a tri-junction by definition means three
countries, yes.
So that is a separate issue.
Right. Now, how do you see the future partnership evolving between India and Bhutan, considering that a lot of new areas are now coming into the economic equation?
I think India has to, like we have shown in our own behavior over the last many decades, we have shown the ability to evolve in our own thinking about how to deal with Bhutan. There was a time when actually Bhutan was almost a quasi state of India. I mean, during the British and even before. So over time, we have shown the maturity to deal with Bhutan and to allow it to flower and to flourish. So I see this process evolving in the same direction in the future, where we will continue to see Bhutan and encourage Bhutan and support Bhutan in whatever national aspirations it has, whatever international aspirations Bhutan may have, and also keep finding newer areas of cooperation, keeping in mind the aspirations of the new generation of Bhutanese, the 20-year-olds, the teenagers, the young, who are very ambitious, who are well connected to the world. They are not isolated like they were 20, 30 years ago. We have to find new areas to make Bhutan a model for bilateral relationship in the region, and to also help Bhutan to achieve its inherent potential, whether it is in the field of tourism, in technology, in IT, in education, in agriculture. And we want to make sure, even for our own sake, that Bhutan preserves its forest cover, its identity as a piece of territory in the Himalayas, which is able to withstand global warming, climate change, and everything that we do or Bhutan does is ecologically friendly. So I think environment, climate, technology, education, skill development, these are going to be, I think, the future areas of our cooperation.
Yeah. And I think on digital connectivity already a lot is happening between the two countries.
Yes, exactly. Digital, then we have network of universities, we are training their young students, even officials. So all that I think is going to increase over time.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Saran, for taking our viewers through the entire gamut of India-Bhutan relations. India and Bhutan share a time-tested relationship that is a perfect example of friendship and cordiality in South Asia. The visit of His Majesty, the King of Bhutan, has reinforced the long-standing tradition of regular high-level exchanges between the two countries and helped advance this close bilateral partnership. That is all I have for you in this, the 75th edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. I'll be back again next week. Till then, take care and goodbye.